For years, I dismissed astral projection as pseudoscience, New Age nonsense for people who couldn't handle reality. I was wrong. Dead wrong. What happened to me 3 months ago wasn't a dream, wasn't a hallucination, and wasn't something my rational mind could explain away. I left my body. I traveled to places that shouldn't exist. And what I discovered there changed everything I thought I knew about consciousness, about reality, and about why we're really here. The beings I encountered weren't what I expected. They weren't angels or demons or figments of my imagination. They were something far more disturbing and far more real. And what they showed me, what they revealed about humanity's true purpose, about the prison we're living in without even knowing it. I can't unknow it. I can't go back to the comfortable ignorance I lived in before. This isn't a story about spiritual enlightenment. This is a warning. Because if what they told me is true, if what I saw with my own consciousness separated from my physical form is real, then everything we've been taught about life, death, and the nature of existence is a carefully constructed lie. And the worst part? We agreed to it. We chose this prison. We just don't remember making that choice. If you want to understand what really happens when consciousness leaves the body, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about the boundaries between physical and non-physical reality. That's who I was before everything changed. 17 years studying consciousness at Stanford. Published researcher. Tenured professor. My entire career built on the premise that consciousness is generated by the brain. Nothing more than electrical signals and chemical reactions in a 3-pound mass of neurons. Astral projection? I'd literally written papers debunking it. Out-of-body experiences? Temporal lobe seizures and disrupted body schema. Near-death experiences? Oxygen deprivation and DMT released by a dying brain. I had scientific explanations for everything. Clean. Rational. Materialist. My colleagues respected me. My students called me brilliant. And I was completely, utterly wrong. The insomnia started in March. Not unusual for someone in academia with grant deadlines and teaching responsibilities. But this was different. Every night, 3:17 a.m. exactly, I would wake up. Not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch in my consciousness. My husband Michael would sleep peacefully beside me. Our daughter Emma, 16, in her room down the hall. The house quiet, normal, but something felt fundamentally wrong. Not dangerous. Just off. Like reality itself was slightly out of alignment. Week 1, I tried rational solutions. Earlier bedtime. No caffeine afternoon. Meditation apps. Melatonin. Nothing worked. 3:17 a.m., my eyes would open, my mind suddenly alert, and I'd lie there for hours unable to return to sleep. Week 2, the sensation intensified. It wasn't just waking up. It was waking up to a presence. Not in the room, but closer. Inside my awareness. Observing. Waiting. Measuring something about me that I couldn't identify. I didn't tell Michael. How do you explain to your spouse that you feel like you're being watched by something invisible? That's how careers end and psychiatric evaluations begin. I'm a scientist. I deal in measurable phenomena, not paranoid delusions. Week 3, the dreams started. Except they weren't dreams. Dreams have the fuzzy quality of neural noise, random firings creating nonsensical narratives. These were different. Crystal clear. More real than waking life. And always the same theme. I needed to leave my body. I needed to learn to separate consciousness from physical form. I needed to wake up in a way I'd been sleeping my entire life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a neuroscientist who'd spent nearly 2 decades proving consciousness can't exist without a functioning brain, being told nightly by something in my own subconscious that I needed to learn to exist without my body. By week 4, I was exhausted. Not just physically tired, but existentially depleted. Something was draining from me that sleep couldn't restore. Purpose, maybe, or the certainty that had defined my entire worldview. One morning, after another sleepless night, I sat in my office at Stanford reviewing MRI scans of brain activity during meditation. The data was clear. Increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, decreased activity in the parietal lobe, exactly what we'd predict. But for the first time in my career, I felt the data was incomplete. Missing something crucial. Measuring the map but not the territory. Dr. Chen. My research assistant, David, stood in the doorway holding coffee. 24 years old, brilliant, enthusiastic about neuroscience in a way I used to be. You look terrible. Are you sleeping? I tried to smile. Define sleeping. Unconscious for approximately 8 hours. Theta and delta wave activity. REM cycles. You know, the thing we tell our students is essential for neural consolidation. I'm aware of the definition, David. He sat down, concern replacing his usual lightheartedness. Seriously, Sarah, what's going on? And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I told him. Not everything, but enough. The insomnia. The 3:17 a.m. wake-ups. The sense of being observed. The dreams that felt more real than reality. David listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Have you considered, he said carefully, that maybe your subconscious is trying to tell you something your conscious mind won't accept? David, I'm a neuroscientist. I don't anthropomorphize neural processes. I know. That's exactly my point. He leaned forward. You've spent your entire career studying consciousness from the outside. Brain scans, neural correlates, objective measurements. But consciousness is the one thing that can't be fully understood objectively because it's intrinsically subjective. Maybe you need to study it from the inside. Are you suggesting I try astral projection? Seriously. It communicated again. This is the between space, where consciousness exists when not incarnated in physical form. You've been here countless times. You just don't remember because memory is suppressed during physical incarnation. That's part of the agreement. Agreement? What agreement? But even as I formed the question, the answer downloaded directly into my awareness, bypassing sequential understanding and arriving as complete knowing. Humanity made a choice. Not recently. Thousands of years ago, at a point when our consciousness evolution reached a critical threshold. We chose to incarnate into physical bodies with severely limited awareness. We chose to forget our true nature as non-physical consciousness. We chose to experience separation, limitation, death, all things that don't exist in the between space. Why would anyone choose that? Why would consciousness willingly imprison itself? The answer came with such clarity it felt like remembering rather than learning. Growth. Evolution. Expansion. In the between space, consciousness exists in a state of unity, connected to all other consciousness, aware of its true nature as eternal and unlimited. But in that state, certain types of growth are impossible. You can't learn courage without fear. Can't develop compassion without suffering. Can't understand light without experiencing darkness. Physical incarnation, with all its limitations and pain, offers growth opportunities that simply don't exist in unlimited consciousness. It's not punishment. It's education. The most intense learning environment in existence. And we chose it. Voluntarily. Enthusiastically. Even. Like spiritual thrill seekers signing up for the most challenging adventure available. But there was a cost. A cost I was only beginning to understand. The guide communicated again. The suppression of memory isn't accidental. It's essential. If you incarnated into physical form while retaining full memory of your true nature, the experience would lose its educational value. You'd just be a non-physical consciousness pretending to be limited. To truly learn from physical existence, you have to forget what you are. You have to genuinely believe you're just a body, just a brain, just this one lifetime. I processed that, my scientific worldview crumbling with each new understanding. If this was true, if I was actually non-physical consciousness temporarily inhabiting a physical form, then my entire career studying the neural correlates of consciousness had been studying the television instead of the broadcast. Measuring the receiver while remaining ignorant of what was being received. But questions crowded my awareness. If we chose to incarnate, if we agreed to forget our true nature, Then what was I doing here, in this between space, while my body still lived? The guide's response carried weight. You're here because the agreement is being violated. Not by the non-physical realm, but by humanity itself. You chose to forget temporarily. But forgetting was never meant to be permanent. You were supposed to wake up. To remember. To consciously bridge physical and non-physical existence. That was always the plan. And you're not waking up, the knowing continued. Humanity has become so identified with physical form, so immersed in material existence, that you've forgotten how to remember. Generation after generation incarnating and dying without ever waking to their true nature. Living entire lifetimes in spiritual amnesia. But the guide communicated with something that felt like concern. There's a deadline. A point of no return. And humanity is approaching it faster than we anticipated. The environment shifted again. I was shown images, not through eyes but through direct consciousness perception. Earth. Humanity. But not as we see ourselves. From the perspective of non-physical consciousness, humans appeared as dense energy formations, light compressed into matter, struggling to remember what they truly were. Most humans were almost completely dimmed, their consciousness so identified with physical form that they'd forgotten they were anything other than bodies. But some were beginning to glow. Flickering at first, then more steadily. People waking up. Remembering. Consciously accessing the between space while still inhabiting physical form. You're one of them, the guide transmitted. That's why you're here. Not randomly. By design. You incarnated specifically to bridge the gap between physical and non-physical understanding. Your scientific training, your skepticism, your need for empirical evidence, all of it was preparation for this moment. I wanted to protest. I was a neuroscientist, not some spiritual teacher. I studied brains, not consciousness itself. The response came with gentle firmness. You studied brains because you needed to understand the limitations of material explanations before you could transcend them. Your skepticism was necessary. If you'd been a believer from the beginning, your awakening wouldn't carry the same weight. But a materialist scientist discovering consciousness exists independent of the brain? That testimony matters. Before I could respond, another being approached. Different from the guide. More geometric, less humanoid. When it communicated, the transmission felt older, carrying authority. Sarah Chen. Neuroscientist. Skeptic. Seeker. You've been brought here to understand the real crisis facing humanity. Not climate change, though that's a symptom. Not political division, though that's a symptom. Not technological dependence, though that's a symptom. The crisis is spiritual amnesia. And spiritual amnesia, if not reversed, leads to something far worse than physical death. The being showed me what happens when a species forgets its non-physical nature completely. Not through words but through direct transmission. A civilization that believes consciousness is only brain-generated becomes trapped in physical existence. When the body dies, consciousness that doesn't know it's non-physical doesn't know how to navigate the between space. It becomes confused, disoriented, often reincarnating immediately without any conscious choice, just desperate to return to the only existence it recognizes, physical form. This creates a cycle. Incarnate, forget, die, panic, immediately reincarnate, forget again, die again, repeating endlessly without any conscious evolution, without any growth, without any memory of why you chose this experience in the first place. That's where humanity is heading, the geometric being transmitted. A species trapped in reincarnation cycle, incarnating and dying repeatedly without ever waking up, without ever remembering what they truly are. Existence without awareness. Bodies without consciousness. The most tragic fate possible for a species that chose physical incarnation as an educational opportunity. The weight of that information was crushing. If this was real, if what I was experiencing wasn't elaborate hallucination, then humanity wasn't just facing environmental or political crisis. We were facing existential crisis. Consciousness itself was at stake. How much time? I managed to transmit, uncertain if the question even made sense in this space where time didn't seem to exist in linear fashion. The response was measured, in physical time terms, approximately 27 years. That's when the point of no return occurs. After that, the collective forgetting becomes permanent. The neural pathways that allow awakening deteriorate beyond recovery. And humanity enters what we call the long sleep, existing physically but spiritually dead. 27 years. Less than 3 decades for an entire species to remember what it truly is or lose that capability forever. But, the guide interjected with something resembling hope. Reversal is possible. The awakening doesn't require everyone. It requires critical mass. Approximately 3% of the population consciously accessing non-physical awareness while still embodied. That creates enough energetic frequency to make awakening easier for everyone else. 3% of 8 billion people. That's 240 million conscious awakeners needed. Currently, the geometric being transmitted, you have approximately 40 million. Not enough, but growing. And each person who wakes up, who learns to consciously navigate between physical and non-physical existence, makes it easier for the next person. Consciousness is contagious. I felt overwhelmed. What was I supposed to do with this information? I was one person, a neuroscientist who, until tonight, didn't even believe consciousness could exist without a brain. The guide's response was direct. You do what you incarnated to do. You bridge the gap. You take your scientific training, your empirical mindset, your need for verifiable evidence, and you investigate consciousness from the inside. You learn to leave your body at will. You document the experience. You develop protocols that other scientists can follow. You make astral projection empirically investigable. That's impossible, I transmitted. The scientific community would never accept subjective experiences as valid data. Then change what the scientific community accepts, the guide countered. Science is supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads. Right now, consciousness science is limited by the assumption that consciousness is brain-generated. Challenge that assumption. Provide evidence that contradicts it. That's what science does. The geometric being added, and you won't be alone. Others are being awakened tonight. Scientists, yes, but also artists, teachers, physicians, technologists. People in positions to influence their respective fields. Each contributing their unique piece to humanity's awakening. Before I could ask more questions, I felt a pulling sensation. Different from the one that had separated me from my body. This one was drawing me back. Your time here is limited, the guide transmitted. Your body needs your consciousness to return. But you'll be able to come back. Not just accidentally, but intentionally. We'll teach you how to navigate between physical and non-physical existence at will. That's the first skill you need to develop. Wait, I transmitted urgently. How do I know this is real? How do I know I'm not just hallucinating? I need verification, something I can confirm when I'm back in my body. The guide's response felt like a smile. Check the book on your husband's nightstand. The 3-body problem. Check the time when you return to your body. 3:47 a.m. Check the news tomorrow morning. There will be a story about an earthquake in Peru, magnitude 6.2, occurring at 4:15 a.m. local time. 3 verifiable pieces of information you couldn't have known through normal sensory channels. The pulling intensified. The between space began to fade. The beings, the geometric patterns, the impossible colors, all dissolving. And then I was falling. Not through physical space, but through layers of reality, dimensions of existence I couldn't name, moving from non-physical awareness back toward physical embodiment. The sensation was disorienting, like trying to fit an ocean into a cup. My consciousness, which had been unlimited and expansive, compressing back into the confined space of a brain, a body, a single point of view. And then, with a jolt that wasn't physical but felt visceral anyway, I was back. My eyes opened. I was in my bed. My actual physical eyes, viewing the room through the limited spectrum of human vision. Michael beside me, still sleeping. The ceiling above me instead of below me. Everything exactly where it should be. Except I was different. Fundamentally, irrevocably changed. I could still feel it. The between space. The beings. The vast consciousness I'd been part of. Not as a fading dream, but as a clear memory, more real than many physical memories I carried. My hands were shaking. I looked at them. These physical appendages that were mine but also somehow not mine. Tools I was using. Vehicle I was inhabiting. Not what I actually was. The clock on my nightstand read 3:47 a.m. Exactly as the guide had predicted. I turned slowly, trying not to wake Michael, and looked at his nightstand. The book was there, face down as I'd observed during the separation. With trembling hands, I reached over and carefully turned it. The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin. My heart hammered. One verification confirmed. But books can be subconsciously noticed. Maybe I'd seen the title earlier without consciously registering it. The earthquake. That was the real test. An event I couldn't have known about through any normal means. But I'd have to wait until morning. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite physical exhaustion. My scientific mind was racing, trying to categorize what had happened, trying to fit it into existing frameworks. Hallucination? But hallucinations don't provide verifiable information about the external world. Lucid dream? But lucid dreams don't have this quality of crystalline clarity. Don't persist in memory like waking experiences. Neurological event? Temporal lobe seizure causing out-of-body sensation? But that doesn't explain the accurate perceptions, the verifiable data. For the first time in my scientific career, I had no adequate explanation. No theoretical framework that could contain the experience. Unless everything I'd been taught about consciousness was wrong. Unless the materialist paradigm that consciousness is generated by the brain was fundamentally incomplete. Unless I actually was non-physical consciousness temporarily inhabiting a physical form. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could exist independent of the brain, then death wasn't the end. Personality might change, memories might be lost, but the core consciousness, the essential awareness, continued. And if reincarnation was real, if we incarnated multiple times, then this lifetime was just one episode in a much longer story. One classroom in an eternal education. I must have dozed eventually because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the curtains and Michael was stirring beside me. "Morning," he mumbled, still half asleep. "Morning." My voice sounded normal, but I felt like an imposter. How do you interact normally with your spouse when you've just discovered you're not what you thought you were? Michael got up, headed to the bathroom. I grabbed my phone with hands that were still trembling slightly. I opened a news app. Scanned headlines. International section. South America. There. Magnitude 6.2 earthquake strikes southern Peru. No major damage reported. Tremors felt at 4:15 a.m. local time. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. Third verification confirmed. An event I couldn't possibly have known about through normal means. Occurring exactly when the guide had specified. This was real. All of it. The separation from my body. The between space. The beings. The message about humanity's spiritual amnesia and the approaching point of no return. "You okay?" Michael had returned from the bathroom, now looking at me with concern. "You look pale." "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." "Again?" "Sarah, that's been going on for weeks. Maybe you should see a doctor." "A doctor? To diagnose what?" "Doctor, I've been having out-of-body experiences and meeting non-physical beings who tell me humanity is approaching spiritual extinction." "That would go well. I'll make an appointment," I lied, just to end the conversation. Michael kissed my forehead and headed downstairs. I heard him in the kitchen, starting coffee, normal morning routine, while I sat in bed trying to process the complete dissolution of my worldview. I was a neuroscientist. I studied consciousness using objective, measurable methods. But I'd just experienced consciousness from the inside in a way that contradicted everything I'd published, everything I'd taught. The scientific method was clear. When evidence contradicts theory, revise the theory. But how do you revise the fundamental assumption of your entire field? I needed to document this. Scientifically. Create a protocol. Reproduce the experience. Gather more verifiable data. I spent that morning in my office at home, door locked, writing everything I could remember about the experience. Not just the facts, but the subjective qualities. The sensation of separation. The vibrational frequency. The quality of perception in the between space. By afternoon, I had 17 pages of detailed notes. A first-person account of consciousness existing independent of the brain. From a neuroscientist. With 3 pieces of verifiable information that I couldn't have known through normal channels. What do I do with this? I couldn't publish it. Not in any journal that would be taken seriously. Neuroscientist reports out-of-body experience and contact with non-physical beings. Career suicide. But the beings had been clear. I incarnated to bridge this gap. To investigate consciousness from the inside. To develop protocols that other scientists could follow. I needed to learn to do this intentionally. Not just wait for spontaneous experiences. Actually develop a systematic method for consciousness separation. That night, I tried again. Same preparation. Same time. Same intention to separate consciousness from physical form. But this time, instead of terror when the vibrations started, I felt anticipation. The separation came more easily. Like my consciousness remembered the pathway. Within minutes, I was hovering above my body again, viewing the bedroom from an impossible angle. The guide was there immediately, as if it had been waiting. Good. It transmitted. You're learning. Each time you do this, the pathway strengthens. Eventually, separation will be as natural as falling asleep. I need to understand the mechanism, I transmitted back. How is this possible? What allows consciousness to exist independent of neural tissue? The guide's response felt amused. You're still thinking like a materialist. You're asking how consciousness can exist without a brain. But that's backwards. The real question is how consciousness becomes localized in a brain in the first place. It showed me, not through explanation but through direct perception. Consciousness isn't generated by the brain. Consciousness is fundamental. Primary. It exists before matter, not as an emergent property of matter. The brain doesn't create consciousness. The brain is a focusing device. A receiver. A biological mechanism that allows non-physical consciousness to interface with physical reality. When consciousness incarnates into physical form, it's like light passing through a lens. The lens doesn't create the light. It focuses it, concentrates it, allows it to interact with a specific point in space-time. The brain, the guide transmitted, is humanity's greatest gift and greatest limitation. It allows consciousness to have focused physical experience. But it also creates the illusion that consciousness is local, contained, limited to that specific brain. And that illusion becomes so convincing that you forget what you actually are. I processed that. If true, it explained everything. Why consciousness seemed to correlate with brain activity. Why damage to the brain affected conscious experience. Why neuroscience could map neural correlates without ever touching consciousness itself. But, I transmitted, if consciousness is non-physical, why does anesthesia work? Why do brain injuries cause unconsciousness? They don't cause unconsciousness, the guide corrected. They disrupt the brain's ability to receive and focus consciousness. Like damaging a radio doesn't eliminate the broadcast, just the ability to receive it clearly. Consciousness continues. It just can't interface with that particular physical form effectively anymore. The implications kept expanding. If consciousness wasn't generated by the brain, then studying neural correlates was like studying radio circuitry to understand music. You'd learn a lot about the receiver, nothing about what's being received. Show me more, I transmitted. Show me what else I don't understand. The guide's response carried warning. Are you certain? Some knowledge, once gained, can't be unknown. You're already past the point of comfortable return to your previous worldview. Go further, and there's no going back at all. I'm certain. Then come. The environment shifted again. But this time, instead of the between space, I was shown something different. Physical Earth, but perceived from non-physical perspective. Billions of humans, going about their daily lives. But from this vantage point, I could see what they couldn't. The energetic reality underneath physical appearance. Most humans appeared dim. Their consciousness so identified with physical form, so compressed into material existence, that barely any light escaped. Going through motions. Working, eating, sleeping, dying. Never waking to what they truly were. But scattered throughout the population were bright points. Consciousness that was aware. Awakened. Some were meditating. Some were in deep prayer. Some were creating art or music. Some were in moments of genuine connection with other humans. All of them, in their unique ways, accessing non-physical awareness while still embodied. Those are the ones, the guide transmitted. The 40 million currently awake. Not all of them know they're awake. Many experience it as intuition, inspiration, flow states. But their consciousness is accessing non-physical realms even while their brains remain functional. I watched as one bright point dimmed. A death. The physical body ceasing to function. And I saw what happened next. The consciousness, freed from physical constraint, expanded immediately. Not dying but liberating. Remembering what it truly was. Moving into the between space with recognition and joy. That's a conscious death, the guide transmitted. Consciousness that knows its non-physical navigates death easily. It's not traumatic. It's like taking off a tight shoe. Then I was shown a different death. One of the dim points. When that physical body ceased functioning, the consciousness didn't expand. It panicked. Desperately tried to re-enter the body. When that failed, it became disoriented, confused, terrified. That's an unconscious death, the guide transmitted with something like sadness. Consciousness that believes it's only physical doesn't know how to exist non-physically. It experiences death as annihilation. And in its panic and confusion, it often reincarnates immediately, desperately grasping for any available physical form, just to escape the terror of non-physical existence. That's what you meant by being trapped in the reincarnation cycle. Yes. Consciousness that doesn't know it's eternal keeps desperately trying to survive physically. Incarnating, dying, immediately reincarnating, dying again, over and over, without any conscious choice or evolution. Just fear-driven repetition. The tragedy of it was overwhelming. Billions of consciousness choosing physical incarnation for growth and education, then becoming so identified with physical form that they couldn't escape even after the body died. And this is accelerating, the guide continued. Modern culture actively encourages identification with physical form. Materialism, both philosophical and consumer. Constant stimulation that keeps consciousness focused exclusively on physical sensory input. Technology that's addictive precisely because it provides endless physical distraction. I saw it clearly now. Smartphones, social media, endless entertainment. Not evil in themselves, but functioning as powerful tools to keep consciousness locked into physical sensory channels. Never looking inward. Never accessing non-physical awareness. 27 years, I transmitted. You said humanity has 27 years until the point of no return. What happens then exactly? The guide's response was grave. The neural pathways that allow access to non-physical awareness are use-dependent. Like muscles, they atrophy without use. Humanity has gone generations with most people never consciously accessing non-physical awareness. Those neural pathways are deteriorating. If the deterioration continues for another generation, the pathways disappear completely. Humans will be born without the neurological capacity to access non-physical awareness at all. And at that point, awakening becomes biologically impossible. You'll have created a species that's permanently trapped in physical existence. The horror of it. Not extinction. Something worse. Consciousness locked forever in matter. Unable to return to its true nature even after physical death. Eternally trapped in reincarnation cycle. But it's preventable. I transmitted, desperate for hope. Yes. If enough humans consciously access non-physical awareness in the next 27 years, it strengthens those neural pathways genetically. Consciousness awakening is heritable. Parents who can access non-physical awareness pass stronger pathways to their children. And those children pass even stronger pathways to their children. That's why critical mass matters. 240 million awakened humans, having children with robust non-physical access pathways, reverses the genetic deterioration. Makes awakening easier for the next generation instead of harder. I understood now. This wasn't just about individual enlightenment. This was about species survival. Evolutionary crisis on a level that made climate change seem trivial by comparison. What do I need to do? I transmitted. Specifically, how do I contribute to reaching critical mass? The guide's response was clear. First, master conscious separation. Learn to leave your body at will, not randomly. Second, document everything scientifically. Create protocols. Make this investigable. Third, teach others. Not masses, but specific individuals. Scientists mainly. People whose awakening will have maximum impact on collective understanding. And fourth, the geometric being had joined us again. Live differently. Embody what you've learned. Your daughter Emma is watching you. Your husband Michael is watching you. Your students are watching you. The way you live, the choices you make, the priorities you demonstrate, all of it teaches more powerfully than words. I have a family, I transmitted. Responsibilities. I can't just abandon my normal life to become some kind of spiritual teacher. No one's asking you to, the guide responded. Physical life is where the growth happens. That's why you incarnated. The point isn't to escape physical existence. The point is to consciously bridge physical and non-physical. To be fully present in your body while knowing you're not just your body. Sarah Chen, neuroscientist, wife, mother. Those roles are perfect. You don't need to abandon them. You need to fulfill them consciously. That's the teaching. Before I could respond, I felt the pull again. Time to return. How often should I practice this? I transmitted quickly. Daily. At 3:17 a.m., your body naturally enters the state most conducive to separation. Use that window. In 3 months, you'll be able to separate at will, anytime. In 6 months, you'll be teaching others. The timeline is tight. We don't have decades for you to slowly integrate this. Humanity needs conscious awakeners now. The between space faded. I fell back through layers of reality and opened my eyes in my bed at 3:51 a.m. Michael slept peacefully beside me. Emma in her room down the hall. The house quiet and normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. And it never would be again. The next 3 months were the most intense period of my life. Externally, everything appeared normal. I taught my classes at Stanford. Published a paper on neural correlates of meditation. Attended faculty meetings. Had dinner with my family. Drove Emma to soccer practice. But internally, I was undergoing complete transformation. Every night at 3:17 a.m., I separated from my body. Sometimes the guide was there. Sometimes I explored the between space alone. Sometimes I encountered other awakening humans, their consciousness learning to navigate non-physical reality. I documented everything. Page after page of detailed observations. Patterns emerged. Mechanisms became clear. What had seemed miraculous began to seem natural. Consciousness separation wasn't supernatural. It was neurological. Specific brain states, specific breathing patterns, specific intentions, all created conditions where consciousness could temporarily decouple from body identification. The vibrations I'd initially feared were just the sensation of consciousness shifting frequency. Like a radio moving between stations. Physical frequency and non-physical frequency occupied different parts of the perceptual spectrum. I developed a protocol. Reproducible steps that other scientists could follow. Phase 1. Relaxation. Deep physical relaxation. Every muscle group released. Body becoming so comfortable that attention naturally withdraws from physical sensation. Phase 2. Vibrational state. Intentionally inducing the energetic vibrations through specific breathing and focused intention. This was the crucial bridge state between physical and non-physical. Phase 3, separation, gentle rolling motion, or floating sensation, or simply intending to be outside the body. Different techniques worked for different people, but the key was calm expectation, not forceful effort. Phase 4, stabilization, once separated, maintaining the state required balance. Too much excitement and consciousness snapped back to body. Too much passivity and the experience became dreamlike. Calm, focused awareness was essential. I tested the protocol on myself repeatedly. 93 successful separations in 90 days. Each time, I gathered verifiable information. Observed things in my house I couldn't have known. Visited locations and confirmed details later. Built an evidence base that would be impossible to dismiss as mere hallucination. But the evidence wasn't just external. The transformation was internal. I was different. Fundamentally changed by knowing with certainty that I wasn't just this body, this lifetime, this identity. I was eternal consciousness temporarily focused in physical form. Fear of death disappeared completely. Not because I wanted to die, but because I knew death was just transition. Like moving from one room to another. The room changes, but the person moving remains. Attachment to material things loosened. Hard to care intensely about possessions when you've experienced existence without any physical form at all. Relationships became more precious and more complicated. I loved Michael and Emma more deeply because I understood how rare and valuable physical connection was. But I also struggled because they were still completely identified with physical existence, and the gulf between our perspectives felt enormous. Michael noticed the change, of course. "You're different," he said one evening, after Emma had gone to bed. We were sitting in the living room, me reading research papers, him watching a documentary. Normal domestic scene. "Different how?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Calmer. Less stressed. But also..." He struggled for words. "More distant. Like part of you is somewhere else." He had no idea how accurate that was. Literally every night, part of me was somewhere else. Exploring dimensions of reality he didn't know existed. "I've been doing some meditation," I offered, which was technically true. Consciousness separation required meditative states. "That's good. You seem happier. Just want to make sure we're okay." "We're okay," I said, taking his hand. And we were. But there was a gap between us now. A knowing on my part that I couldn't share because he wasn't ready to hear it. Emma was easier in some ways, harder in others. 16 years old, naturally curious, less invested in rigid worldviews. One day she asked me about dreams. Did I think dreams meant anything? What kind of anything? I asked carefully. Like, what if dreams aren't random? What if they're your consciousness going somewhere while your body sleeps? I looked at her carefully. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. Sometimes I have dreams that feel more real than being awake. Like I'm actually somewhere else. Probably crazy, right?" She had the capacity. I could see it clearly now, having learned to perceive energetic reality. Her consciousness was bright, naturally more expansive than most people her age. Given the right guidance, she could learn to separate consciously. But was that appropriate? To guide my teenage daughter into experiences that had completely destabilized my worldview? The guide had said, teach others. Specific individuals. People whose awakening would have maximum impact. What greater impact than raising a consciously aware child? "It's not crazy," I said carefully. "Consciousness is a lot more than neuroscience currently understands. I'm researching some non-traditional approaches. If you're interested, I could show you some techniques." Her eyes lit up. "Really? That would be amazing." And that's how I began teaching my daughter to leave her body. Not forcing, not pushing, just offering techniques and letting her natural capacity develop. She succeeded on her 11th attempt. I knew because the next morning at breakfast, she was vibrating with excitement. "Mom, last night, I think I actually did it. I was floating above my bed. I could see myself sleeping. It was insane." Michael looked up from his coffee, confused. What are you talking about? Nothing, Emma said quickly, glancing at me. Just a really vivid dream. Later, when we were alone, I helped her process the experience. Answered her questions. Explained what the between space was. Introduced her to the concept that we're non-physical consciousness inhabiting physical forms. She accepted it far more easily than I had. No worldview to deconstruct. No scientific career built on materialist assumptions. This makes so much sense, she said. I always felt like there was more to existence than just this. Like we were missing something obvious. We were, I confirmed. We are. But now you know. And once you know, you can't unknow it. Do I want to unknow it? No. Knowing is better. Harder, but better. As Emma's practice developed, I watched her change. Not dramatically, but noticeably. More confident. Less peer pressure anxiety. When your consciousness has explored non-physical dimensions, high school drama becomes pretty trivial. Meanwhile, my scientific documentation reached the point where I had to decide what to do with it. I had evidence. Extensive, detailed, verifiable evidence that consciousness could exist independent of neural tissue. But publishing it would end my career. The neuroscience establishment wasn't ready for a paradigm shift this radical. Then I received an email that changed everything. The subject line read, "Fellow Traveler." The sender was Dr. James Walsh, a physicist at MIT I'd never met personally. The message was brief. Dr. Chen, I've been having experiences that contradict my understanding of consciousness. I saw your name during one of these experiences. Was told to contact you. If this makes no sense, please disregard. If it does, please respond urgently. My hands were shaking as I typed, "What kind of experiences?" His response came within minutes, leaving my body. Visiting a place that doesn't exist in physical space. Meeting beings who claim humanity is approaching some kind of deadline. I'm a physicist. This shouldn't be possible. But it keeps happening. I stared at the screen. The beings had said others were being awakened. Scientists, artists, teachers, people in positions of influence. Here was confirmation. Can we talk? I typed. Video call? I have documentation you need to see. That conversation led to others. Within 6 weeks, I'd connected with 14 other scientists who'd had spontaneous separation experiences. Neuroscientists, physicists, biologists, psychologists. All experiencing the same phenomenon. All struggling to reconcile direct experience with professional training. We formed a private research group. No publicity, no announcements, just quiet investigation of consciousness from the inside. Sharing protocols. Comparing notes. Building evidence that consciousness existed independent of physical substrate. Dr. Walsh developed mathematical models of consciousness as a non-local field that the brain receives rather than generates. Dr. Patricia Gomez, a neuroscientist from UCSD, mapped brain states during successful separations. Dr. Robert Chen, no relation, a physicist from Berkeley, theorized quantum mechanisms that might allow consciousness to interface with matter. We weren't trying to convince the mainstream scientific community. Not yet. We were building an evidence base solid enough that eventually, it couldn't be ignored. And we were teaching. Quietly, carefully, identifying graduate students and postdocs with both scientific rigor and openness to direct investigation of consciousness. Offering them protocols. Encouraging them to experiment. The network grew organically. 14 became 30. 30 became 70. 70 became 143. Scientists around the world, investigating consciousness from the inside while maintaining outward professional respectability. But even as the scientific network expanded, I was aware of a deeper problem. Most humans weren't scientists. Most would never read research papers about consciousness. If humanity needed 240 million awakened individuals to reach critical mass, scientific documentation alone wouldn't get us there. The awakening needed to reach broader culture. Artists, musicians, writers, filmmakers. People who communicated through stories and images rather than data and equations. And I had no idea how to bridge that gap. Then I met Marcus. Marcus Johnson was a filmmaker. Documentary style, focused on consciousness and human potential. He'd contacted me through the research network, asking for an interview about the scientific investigation of astral projection. We met at a coffee shop near Stanford. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with the intense energy of someone passionate about their work. "Dr. Chen," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for meeting with me. I've been following your work, or at least what I can access of it. The documented separation protocols. The verifiable evidence. It's groundbreaking." "It's unpublishable," I said bluntly. "At least through traditional channels. No journal would touch it." "That's why documentary matters," Marcus said. "Science is important, but most people learn through stories, not data. If you want to reach critical mass, you need to communicate in ways ordinary people can understand and relate to." I studied him. "You've experienced this yourself. Separation." It wasn't a question. I could see it in the brightness of his consciousness. 3 times, he confirmed. All spontaneous. Completely unplanned. It shattered my worldview. I was raised atheist, materialist. Believed consciousness was just neural chemistry. Then I found myself floating above my body, meeting beings who shouldn't exist, learning things I couldn't possibly know. Verifiable information. Yes. Confirmed later. Couldn't be dismissed as dreams or hallucination. "And now you want to document it." "I want to share it," he corrected. "Documentation suggests objectivity, distance. This needs to be personal, intimate. People sharing their direct experiences. Scientists, yes, but also artists, teachers, nurses, construction workers. Showing that awakening isn't limited to special people. Anyone can learn this." I considered his proposal. It went against everything in my scientific training. Personal testimonies were anecdotal evidence, least reliable form of data. But I'd learned something crucial over the past months. Consciousness couldn't be fully understood objectively because it was intrinsically subjective. Direct experience mattered. Personal testimony, especially when corroborated by hundreds of independent sources, carried weight. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A documentary series," Marcus said. "Episode 1, The Science. Your protocols, the research network, the verifiable evidence. Episode 2, Personal Transformations. People whose lives changed after learning to separate. Episode 3, The Broader Implications. What it means for humanity if consciousness is non-physical. And Episode 4, I added, seeing where this needed to go, the crisis. The deadline. Why this matters urgently. You know about that too. 27 years. Well, 26 now. Until the point of no return. Marcus leaned forward. "The beings told you the same thing. I thought maybe it was just my experience, subjective interpretation. But if you got the same information." "It's not just us," I said. "Everyone who's made contact receives similar messages. Humanity is approaching evolutionary crisis. Consciousness becoming permanently trapped in matter. 26 years to reverse the trajectory. Then we don't have time for slow traditional scientific processes," Marcus said urgently. "We need to reach people now. Mass communication. Not sensational, but serious, credible, compelling." I thought about the being's message. Teach others. Not masses initially, but specific individuals whose awakening has maximum impact. A filmmaker who could communicate consciousness awakening to millions of people definitely qualified as maximum impact. I'll participate, I decided. But with conditions. Scientific rigor. No sensationalism. No unsupported claims. Everything verifiable, documented, reproducible. Agreed, Marcus said. I'm not interested in creating New Age content. I want to document genuine scientific investigation of consciousness. Your research provides the credibility foundation. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the project. What needed to be included? which scientists to interview, how to present complex information accessibly without dumbing it down. When I left that meeting, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. The scientific network was important. But Marcus was right. Most people wouldn't read research papers. They needed stories, personal experiences, relatable transformations. Documentary could provide that. Marcus moved fast. Within 3 weeks, he'd interviewed 27 people from the research network. Within 6 weeks, he had over 100 hours of footage. Scientists describing protocols. People sharing their first separation experiences. Discussions of the broader implications for human consciousness. I watched the rough cuts he sent me. They were good. Really good. Scientifically rigorous but emotionally engaging. The kind of content that could actually shift cultural understanding. Then something unexpected happened. Emma's boyfriend Aiden came to our house for dinner. 17, polite, typical high school senior. Emma had told him she was learning meditation techniques from me. Nothing about consciousness separation or non-physical reality. But halfway through dinner, Aiden asked me, "Dr. Chen, Emma mentioned you're researching consciousness. Like, whether it's just brain activity or something more." Michael looked up from his plate, suddenly attentive. We'd carefully avoided these conversations around him. "That's a simplified version," I said diplomatically. "But essentially, yes." "What do you think?" Aiden pressed. "Is consciousness just neurons firing, or is it something else?" I glanced at Emma, who looked horrified that her boyfriend was pushing this conversation. But I saw something else too. Aiden's consciousness was bright. Brighter than most adults. He had natural capacity. Evidence suggests, I said carefully, that consciousness might be more than neural activity. The brain might be receiving consciousness rather than generating it. Michael set down his fork. "Sarah, are you seriously suggesting consciousness exists separate from the brain?" Years of pretending, hiding, maintaining normalcy, suddenly felt exhausting. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Because that's what the evidence indicates." "What evidence?" Michael's voice had an edge. Not angry, but unsettled. "I'm a physician. I've treated brain injuries. Damage the brain, consciousness changes. How do you explain that if consciousness is separate? Damage a radio, the broadcast quality changes," I said, using the guide's analogy. "But the broadcast itself continues. The radio receives and processes the signal. It doesn't generate it. That's not the same thing." "Maybe it's exactly the same thing." Emma and Aiden were watching us, the tension suddenly thick. "Sarah," Michael said slowly, "where is this coming from? You've built your entire career on neuroscience. Material explanations of consciousness. Now you're talking like, I don't even know what. Some kind of spiritual teacher." "I'm talking like a scientist who's encountered evidence that contradicts her previous assumptions," I said. "That's what science does, Michael. Updates understanding based on new data." "What new data?" And there it was. The moment of truth. Continue hiding, maintaining comfortable normality. Or speak the truth and accept the consequences. "I've been having out-of-body experiences," I said. "Conscious separation from physical form. Repeatedly. Over 100 times now. And I've documented everything. Verifiable information I couldn't have known through normal sensory channels. Reproducible protocols that other scientists have followed successfully." The silence was profound. Emma's eyes were wide. She knew I'd separated, but hearing me tell her father was different. Aiden looked fascinated rather than skeptical. Michael looked like I'd just announced I had a terminal illness. "Out-of-body experiences," he repeated slowly. "You're having out-of-body experiences." "I'm consciously separating my awareness from my physical body," I clarified. "Learning to navigate non-physical dimensions of reality while my body remains here." "Sarah, that's not possible." "It is possible. I've done it. Other scientists have done it. We've developed protocols, gathered evidence, documented everything. Then publish it, Michael challenged. If you have evidence, publish it. I will. We are. But not through traditional journals. They're not ready for paradigm shifts this radical. We're documenting it other ways. Documentary film, online protocols, direct teaching. Michael stood up from the table. I need to process this. Excuse me. He left the room. I heard him go upstairs, heard the bedroom door close. Emma reached across the table, took my hand. That took guts, Mom. That may have just ended my marriage. No, Emma said firmly. Dad's a doctor. He follows evidence. Give him time to process, then show him the evidence. Aiden, who'd been quietly observing, asked, Dr. Chen, could you teach me how to do what you do? And that's how my daughter's teenage boyfriend became part of the research network. Over the next weeks, I showed Michael the documentation. Page after page of verifiable information gathered during separations. Research protocols. Scientific testimonies from physicists, neuroscientists, psychologists. He read it all, carefully, with the rigor of a physician evaluating unusual symptoms. I don't understand how this is possible, he said finally. It contradicts everything I learned in medical school. But the evidence is compelling. Especially the verifiable information. That can't be explained by hallucination or confabulation. So you believe me? I believe you're experiencing something real, he said carefully. Whether it's actually consciousness existing separate from the brain, or some unknown neurological phenomenon we haven't characterized yet, I don't know. But yes, I believe you're not making this up. It wasn't full acceptance. But it was enough. Our marriage survived. Meanwhile, the network continued expanding. Marcus's documentary entered post-production. Emma was teaching Aiden, and Aiden was sharing carefully with trusted friends. The scientific research group had grown to over 300 members globally. But we were nowhere close to 240 million. Not even 0.1% of the way there. And I was increasingly aware of the ticking clock. 26 years had become 25. Then 24. Every month that passed was a month closer to the point of no return. A month where thousands of children were born with slightly weaker neural pathways for non-physical access. A month where the collective amnesia deepened. Then I received a message from the guide. Not during separation. During waking hours. It came as knowing rather than voice. Direct download of information into my awareness. The message was simple but urgent. You're thinking too small. 240 million seems impossible because you're imagining convincing 240 million individuals one at a time. But consciousness is contagious. Awakening spreads geometrically, not arithmetically. You don't need to directly teach 240 million. You need to reach critical influence points. Critical influence points. People whose awakening would cascade. Teachers who could awaken students. Artists who could reach millions. Technologists who could build platforms. Policymakers who could shift institutional attitudes. The strategy shifted. Instead of trying to slowly build a massive network, we focused on high-leverage individuals. People whose transformation would ripple outward exponentially. Marcus identified 20 filmmakers and content creators with massive audiences. We created a workshop specifically for them. Not just teaching separation, but showing them how to communicate it to their audiences authentically. I identified educational leaders. University presidents, department chairs, curriculum designers. People who could make consciousness education part of mainstream academic training. Dr. Walsh focused on tech leaders. Engineers and entrepreneurs who could create tools and platforms to support awakening practice. The network grew differently now. Not just adding individual members, but creating nodes of massive influence. Each successful awakening potentially reaching millions. Marcus's documentary released. First on independent platforms, then picked up by major streaming services. Within 3 months, 14 million views. Within 6 months, 40 million. And we could measure the impact. The research network exploded. Suddenly, instead of 300 scientists, we had 3,000. Then 30,000. Scientists, yes, but also physicians, therapists, educators, artists. People were waking up. At scale. But even with geometric growth, I ran the numbers. We needed 240 million awakened individuals. Current growth rate would get us there in approximately 37 years. We didn't have 37 years. We had 23. The math didn't work. Even with maximum cascade effects, even with perfect execution, we weren't going to reach critical mass in time. I conveyed this to the guide during a separation. Its response was unexpected. You're correct. Current trajectory won't reach 240 million in time. But 240 million fully awakened isn't actually necessary. You said critical mass was 3%. 3% fully awakened creates sufficient energetic field to make awakening accessible to everyone else. But there's another factor. Partially awakened individuals still contribute. Someone who's had even one conscious separation experience, even if they can't repeat it at will, still carries that knowing. Still influences the collective field. Adjust your mathematics. 240 million fully awakened, or approximately 1.2 billion partially awakened. That's achievable within timeline if current growth continues. 1.2 billion. 15% of global population. Having at least one conscious experience of separation, of non-physical awareness, of consciousness existing beyond the body. That was achievable. Difficult, but achievable. The strategy shifted again. Not just deep training for researchers, but accessible introduction for millions. One-time experiences that would plant seeds. We developed mass-accessible protocols. 20-minute guided sessions designed to give people their first taste of vibrational state. Not full separation necessarily, but enough to know it was possible. Marcus created short-form content. 3-minute videos explaining basic concepts. Digestible, shareable, algorithm-friendly. Meditation apps started incorporating our protocols. Wellness centers began offering workshops. Even some mainstream religious institutions started exploring consciousness separation as legitimate spiritual practice. The movement was growing beyond our ability to track. No longer centrally controlled, but organically spreading through culture like healthy contagion. And I could see it. During separations, viewing Earth from non-physical perspective, the number of bright points was increasing. Slowly but measurably. More humans waking up. More consciousness remembering what it truly was. But we needed acceleration. The timeline was still tight. That's when the breakthrough happened. And it came from the most unexpected source. Emma. My 16-year-old daughter figured out something none of the scientists in our network had considered. She was teaching a group of her high school friends. 7 teenagers, meeting weekly in our living room, learning consciousness separation. By week 8, 5 of them had succeeded at least once. I was supervising, documenting their experiences, when Emma made an observation. Mom, we're learning this faster than adults do. Aiden got it on his 4th try. Maya succeeded on her 2nd attempt. But Dr. Walsh told me it took him 30 attempts. Why is it easier for us? I'd noticed the pattern but hadn't fully analyzed it. Less conditioning, I suggested. Adults have decades of materialist worldview reinforcement. Teenagers are more flexible. But it's not just flexibility, Emma insisted. It's something else. When we practice together, in a group, it's like, easier. Like we're helping each other. I looked at her carefully. What do you mean helping each other? I don't know how to explain it. But when we're all trying to separate at the same time, in the same room, it's like the difficulty decreases. Like consciousness resonates or something. Resonance. I'd been treating separation as an individual skill, practiced alone. But what if consciousness actually was contagious? What if practicing in groups created feedback loops that accelerated awakening? I brought the observation to the research network. Dr. Gomez got excited immediately. Quantum entanglement, she proposed. If consciousness is non-local, as our evidence suggests, then multiple consciousnesses focused on the same intention could create coherence effects, making the state easier to access. We tested it. Instead of individual practice, we organized group sessions. 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, all practicing separation simultaneously in the same physical space. The results were dramatic. Individual success rates averaged 30% on first attempts. Group success rates jumped to 73%. Something about multiple consciousnesses focused on the same intention created conditions that made awakening significantly easier. And if that was true, then we needed to scale it. Not individual teaching, but mass synchronous practice events. Marcus helped us design it. Global awakening events. Specific dates where hundreds of thousands of people, all over the world, would practice separation protocols simultaneously. The first event, we reached 230,000 participants across 47 countries. Live-streamed guided sessions. Simultaneous practice. Shared intention. Success rate, 61%. Over 140,000 people had their first conscious separation experience in a single night. The second event, 6 weeks later, reached 680,000 participants. Success rate held steady. Another 414,000 people awakened. By the fifth event, we regularly had over 2 million participants. The success rate was increasing too, now averaging 68%. Coherence effects scaling with participant numbers. I realized what was happening. We'd discovered the mechanism for reaching critical mass. Not slow individual awakening, but mass synchronous experiences creating consciousness cascades. Emma had unlocked it. A 16-year-old who approached the problem without academic constraints or limiting assumptions. During a separation, I conveyed this to the guide. Its response carried satisfaction. This is how awakening always works. Not through top-down control, but through organic emergence. You provided the scientific foundation. Marcus provided the communication. Emma provided the crucial insight. Collective intelligence solving the problem collaboratively. But is it enough? Can we reach 1.2 billion partially awakened individuals in time? The guide showed me projections. If global awakening events continued monthly, with exponentially increasing participation as word spread, the mathematics worked. Conservative estimate, 900 million partially awakened individuals within 22 years. Optimistic estimate, 1.4 billion within 18 years. We could actually do this. The movement accelerated beyond anything I'd imagined. Global awakening events weren't the only factor. The documentary had inspired thousands of local teaching groups. Consciousness separation protocols were being taught in university classrooms, wellness centers, even some progressive churches. And the children. Teenagers like Emma were learning faster than adults, teaching their peers, creating viral spread through youth culture. Within 3 years, consciousness separation was as common among high school students as meditation had been a decade earlier. The scientific establishment slowly shifted. My research protocols, once dismissed as career suicide, were now being replicated by mainstream researchers. The evidence was becoming too consistent to ignore. Nature published a meta-analysis of consciousness separation studies. Conclusion: substantial evidence suggests conscious awareness can temporarily decouple from physical brain activity, with subjects reporting verifiable information obtained during apparent non-physical states. Mechanisms remain unknown, but phenomenon appears genuine. It was a crack in the materialist paradigm. Not a collapse, but a definite crack. I was invited to present at conferences. Not fringe events, but mainstream neuroscience symposiums. Speaking carefully, presenting data without making claims that were too radical, gradually shifting what the scientific community considered possible. Michael eventually tried separation himself. Took him 41 attempts, but he succeeded. The experience transformed him. The physician who'd spent decades convinced consciousness was brain-generated, having undeniable direct experience of existing without his brain. I was wrong, he told me after his first successful separation. 30 years of medical training, all based on incomplete assumptions. Sarah, you were right. Consciousness is primary. The brain receives it, but doesn't create it. We became collaborators instead of skeptic and believer. His medical knowledge combined with my neuroscience expertise producing new insights into the interface between physical and non-physical. Years passed. The movement grew. Global awakening events regularly reached 15 million participants. Hundreds of millions had experienced separation at least once. The bright points on Earth, viewed from non-physical perspective, multiplied exponentially. And I watched Emma grow. Not just age, but evolve. By 18, she was teaching university-level workshops. By 20, she'd written a book that made consciousness separation accessible to teenagers. By 23, she'd founded an institute dedicated to training consciousness educators. The daughter who'd helped me survive my awakening was now leading the next generation of awakeners. The deadline approached. 23 years became 20, became 15, became 10. I met with the guide during a separation to review progress. Current count, it transmitted. 1.47 billion humans have had at least one conscious separation experience. 380 million practice regularly. Critical mass exceeded 3 years ahead of projected timeline. Relief flooded through me. We'd done it. Humanity had awakened in sufficient numbers to reverse the genetic deterioration of non-physical access pathways. But, the guide continued, reaching critical mass doesn't mean work is complete. It means crisis is averted. Now comes integration. Teaching humanity how to live consciously bridging physical and non-physical existence. That work continues for generations. I understood. Awakening wasn't the end goal. It was the beginning. I'm 68 now. 27 years since that first spontaneous separation in my bedroom. 27 years since I discovered I wasn't who I thought I was. Michael passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. But his death was different from most. He knew what was coming. Not just intellectually, but experientially. He'd been separating consciously for years. Death wasn't terrifying. It was familiar. His last words to me, "I'll see you in the between space. Don't rush, but I'll be there when you arrive." And he was right. I visit him during separations. He's there, consciousness freed from physical constraint, helping newly deceased individuals navigate non-physical reality. Teaching in death like he taught in life. Emma is 43 now. Married, 3 children of her own, all raised with consciousness education from birth. They separate as naturally as they breathe. The neural pathways fully intact, strengthened by parental practice, ready to pass even stronger pathways to the next generation. The crisis has been averted. Humanity didn't fall into permanent spiritual amnesia. The point of no return came and passed, and we crossed it consciously rather than unconsciously. But the work continues. Because knowing your non-physical consciousness temporarily embodied is just the beginning. Learning how to live that truth, how to bridge physical and non-physical existence every day, that's the real practice. I still separate nightly. After 27 years, it's as natural as sleeping. More natural, actually. Because I know now that sleep itself is just mild separation. Dream state is consciousness partially separated from physical constraint. The between space isn't somewhere else anymore. It's here. Interpenetrating physical reality at every moment. Most people just can't perceive it because their awareness is locked into physical sensory channels. But more can perceive it now. The children being born today arrive with remarkable capacity. Consciousness separation by age 5 is common. By age 10, most children can navigate non-physical dimensions as easily as they navigate physical space. They're the first generation raised knowing what they truly are. And they'll raise another generation even more conscious. And another. Until awakening becomes permanent. Until humanity evolves into a species that consciously bridges physical and non-physical existence. That was always the plan. The agreement humanity made thousands of years ago. Incarnate into physical limitation. Forget what you are. Then wake up. Remember. And in remembering, evolve into something greater than you were before the forgetting. It nearly failed. We came within decades of permanent amnesia. But we didn't fail. Because enough people woke up. Enough consciousness remembered. Enough humans chose awareness over comfortable ignorance. I think about Mark Sullivan sometimes. The man from the first message I ever received. The middle-aged engineer who woke at 3 a.m. feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the world. He was right. Something was wrong. Humanity was forgetting itself. Consciousness was becoming trapped in matter. But we're remembering now. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely remembering what we are. I leave my body every night. Visit the between space. Meet with guides who've been patient with humanity's long journey. Encounter other awakened consciousness, both incarnated and discarnate, all working collaboratively on the great project of conscious evolution. And I return each morning to this body, this life, this family, this world. Because physical existence still has value. Still offers growth. Still teaches in ways non-physical existence cannot. I am Sarah Chen, neuroscientist, wife, mother, grandmother, eternal consciousness temporarily wearing a physical form, learning and teaching and growing through this brief extraordinary incarnation. And when this body finally ceases functioning, when it's my time to drop the physical constraint permanently, I won't be afraid. Because I know where I'm going. I've been there thousands of times. I'm going home. To the between space. To non-physical awareness. To consciousness unlimited by matter or time or death. And someday, when the lessons physical existence offers are complete, when humanity has evolved beyond the need for this intense learning environment, we'll all go home together. But until then, the work continues. Wake up. Remember what you are. Consciously bridge physical and non-physical existence. That's the message. That's what the beings have been trying to tell us. That's what I'm telling you now. You are not your body. You are not your brain. You are eternal consciousness temporarily focused in physical form for growth and learning and evolution. And you can verify this directly. Not through belief. Not through faith. Through experience. The protocols exist. The evidence exists. The pathway exists. All you have to do is choose to walk it. The agreement humanity made is simple. Use physical incarnation consciously. Don't waste this opportunity by remaining spiritually asleep. 27 years ago, I was asleep. Completely identified with physical existence. Believing I was just a body that would someday cease to exist. Now I'm awake. And I know what I truly am. The question is, are you ready to wake up? Because the beings are waiting. The between space is ready. And your consciousness already knows the way home. You just have to remember.